The title of the presentation is If You Build It, They Will Come. And the subtitle is, of course, Or Will They? Because one of the big questions that all developers have, but particularly ArtSpace as a nonprofit developer for the arts, is knowing what the market for a project is. If we get into a situation where we are developing an ArtSpace project and don't really know what the market size is, we always run the risk of having a project that is slow to fill up, which is expensive for us, particularly because we're a nonprofit. And so we look very carefully at the market for arts spaces of various kinds in a community before we make any kind of a commitment to move forward. So I'm going to start, well, first of all, just by saying I'm from ArtSpace, and we're based in Minnesota, and our motto is building better communities through the arts. And we've been doing this now for a couple of decades and more. We're here because the city of York brought us in originally. Kevin Schreiber, who's now with the Commonwealth House of Representatives, was then the head of economic development for the city and was instrumental in bringing us in, and we always like to make those acknowledgments, as well as the other organizations that have supported us. Front and center there is the Cultural Alliance of York County, which is responsible for this event, and I would particularly like to thank, I don't know if she's here, but acknowledge Kelly Gibson, who has made this event run like clockwork, and certainly better than any clock I've ever owned. So it's a pleasure to be in an environment where things are going the way they ought to go. A little bit of background about ArtSpace as an organization. Those of you who attended this morning's press conference are probably aware of all of this. You've seen these slides. But those of you who are new to ArtSpace, this is who we are and what we are. We are a nonprofit arts organization based in Minneapolis, established in 1979 by the Minneapolis City Council. And the situation that we were created to address was one in which artists who had begun to colonize and popularize the Minneapolis Warehouse District on the edge of downtown were being driven out as the area became more popular, and were being forced to find other space. And being artists, they didn't know where to go or where to look. And ArtSpace was created to address this issue. And for many years, even when I joined ArtSpace in 1999, we were still operating a newsletter which for artists provided them information about spaces that they might go to, and for landlords it was an opportunity to list their spaces. And so it was a good way of connecting artists and affordable spaces. Ultimately we gave it up because in the late 1980s the ArtSpace board decided that what was really essential to serve the mission was to maintain space that was affordable, and that the only way to do this was to own and operate the space ourselves. And so instead of being an advisory organization, the ArtSpace became a real estate developer, basically, and that's still what we do. And we did our first project, began it in downtown St. Paul in the late 1980s. It opened in 1990, and in the early years, we were doing a project every year or two, or I think we did 3 projects in the first 4 years. And these days we do 2 to 4 projects a year. And we have become the national leader in what is called creative placemaking, which we define as the leveraging of cultural assets and creative assets to bring about social change in a community. And it's in fact economic change. It's a variety of effects that communities are interested in achieving, but the idea of using culture and the arts and artists to accomplish it is really only about a generation old. We are based in Minneapolis. We have about 50 employees, most of whom are in Minneapolis in one big building on the edge of downtown. We have offices, small offices in Seattle, Los Angeles, New York, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C. Those are, I think, at the moment, 1 employee each. And we have 36 completed projects around the country in 14 states and the District of Columbia. The most recent of them opened in Seattle last week. And so people are moving in as we speak. We've got another 10 projects or so under construction or in development. And when I say we work all over the country, these projects include a magnificent project in East Harlem in New York that will be 90 units of housing in a 5-story Gothic school that was abandoned. And it's completely surrounded by a public housing project. It's a remarkable and interesting and very difficult project to do. Working in New York is like working in no other city in the country. We have one in New Orleans where there is a 2-block campus of school buildings that was devastated by Hurricane Katrina and sat empty ever since. And over the course of a couple of years, we're going to renovate that entire campus and make it into, I think, 70-some units of housing and various other things. That's in the Treme neighborhood, which is the historical black neighborhood of New Orleans. And we're doing one in Honolulu, Hawaii, which will have the first Native Hawaiian Cultural Center as part of the project. And then we're doing one that will not have housing, but will have 2 different kinds of components. It'll have a fixed component and a mobile component, because it's in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, which has I think it's about the same size physically as the state of Connecticut. And so to put a single facility in the middle of it is fine, but we're going to have some kind of a vehicle that will drive around to all corners of the reservation, and will help the artists on the reservation figure out ways to, right there, ways to make a living out of their art. Altogether, we've had about 1,200 affordable units in our project so far. They serve more than 2,000 artists and their families, and about 3.5 million square feet of space when you add it all up. We are a nonprofit. Our mission is to create, foster, and preserve affordable space for artists and arts organizations. We have basically 3 branches of art space. Property development is the wing of art space that actually comes in and builds the project, and they're of course the ones that everybody loves to see. Comes in, selects a site, works with the city, picks a contractor, picks an architect, is responsible for making sure that the project gets built and gets built in an effective way that serves the community and its artists. Asset management is a necessary division because our mission is includes to preserve affordable space, and so we continue to own and operate what we build. Unlike a lot of developers, most developers, I think, of affordable housing, when the affordable housing tax credit compliance period is done, they move on. They sell the building and they move on to other projects. We don't sell the building and move on to other projects, because once we sell the building, we can no longer guarantee that it is affordable, and we can no longer guarantee that it has an artist preference. So we continue to own and operate these buildings, and we have an asset management department that is in charge of that. National consulting, my colleague Anna Grocott and I work in the consulting division. We're the people who come in and look at the old buildings and the vacant lots and talk to the people at the beginning of the process. I can't tell you how many art space projects there are that I know only as vacant buildings or vacant lots. And after I went away, other people came in, did the project, and now it's open and operating, and I don't know what it looks like except from pictures. That's the nature of the consulting business, but we have a good time. This is where we work. And those of you on the edges, I'm sorry, this is not the most legible of maps in the best of circumstances, but what you see is a lot of little squares representing places where we have developed projects, where we have projects that are in development, and the light gray, almost illegible squares are places where we have done consulting. And some of you can see that we've put a little circle around York, just so that you can spot yourselves on the map, I guess you would say. We've done several other consulting jobs in Pennsylvania, and our first project outside the state of Minnesota was in Pittsburgh, in the East Liberty neighborhood, where there's a project of about 37 units called the Spinning Plate Artists Lofts, and it's in a building that's shaped like a wedge of pie, with a magnificent gallery on the first floor in the long corner. It was originally an automobile dealership, and the gallery went into the showroom. And so it has terrazzo floors, a nice high ceiling, and you can imagine Pontiacs, but it's a really lovely space. And that was our first project outside of Minnesota. We've done some consulting work in Scranton, and I think in Wilkes-Barre, and somebody said Easton, but I don't know about that one. And so, Philadelphia. So, good deal of work in Philadelphia. So the kinds of projects that ArtSpace does, in terms of, if you divide it into sort of categories, we've done a lot of historical rehabilitation. At the beginning, when we were a young developer, that's mostly what we did. We would go into old warehouses or factories or hospitals or schools and renovate them and bring them up to speed. And this is a good example. This is a project that opened 14 years ago in Reno, Nevada. That's the Riverside Hotel. It was built in the 20s by Nevada's most distinguished architect as a divorce hotel. In those days, if you wanted a divorce, especially if you were living in California, you went to Reno. And Nevada had a relatively flexible, shall we say, divorce law, and all you had to do was establish residency for I think it started at 6 months, and then it went to 3, but it was a great business. And this hotel was built for the divorce trade, and it was just fine until no-fault divorce became the law of the land in, I think, the 60s or 70s, and hotels like this all over Nevada lost their raison d'etre, and this one was converted into a casino for a while, but it went downhill. It closed, and ArtSpace was invited to come in and renovate it, and it's now 35 live-work units. Has a nice restaurant on the ground floor, coffee shop, and so on and so forth. It's very cool, and this. There, that's the Truckee River. So this has really one of the most picturesque sights of any ArtSpace project, and of course there's a mountain range in the background. We also do new construction, and this is a project that's fairly recent. It's now about 5 years old, from Santa Cruz, California, which is a city where the real estate values had gotten so high that artists were moving out of the city because they just couldn't afford to live there. And so the city was concerned about ways of bringing artists back. There was a historic 19th century tannery that became available, and the redevelopment agency acquired it and made it into what is now called the Tannery Art Center. And the first phase of it was 100 units of new housing that we did in 2 new buildings that it's in a floodplain, and so this level here is just for cars, and the housing is actually built on the second floor and above, on the theory that it's a lot easier to move a car than a bed and a sofa. So and that's been very successful, and and the need for it was so dramatic that when the applications for housing units became available, the artists in the area showed up several days ahead of time and pitched tents, and it was like a rock concert, and food vendors came and, you know, provided. It was really something. And so now there are 100 units of housing, and it's been very successful. And then as a second phase, we did non-residential right across the plaza, and we took some historic buildings and renovated them. And those are things like a dance studio and other kinds of studios and related shops. That's been a very successful project. And then we also do old and new together. And we've done this on several projects where we have either, in this case, we added 3 stories to an existing building in Seattle. This was our first project in Seattle. I think it might be my favorite project of any that ArtSpace has done. 50 units of housing, 15, 16, 17 galleries on the lower levels. It is now the center of the Seattle independent gallery scene, and it was a dead pocket of Seattle's Pioneer Square when we moved in. It's been really a transformative project for them, and a nice project. And the spaces inside, I'll show you one in a minute, are really beautiful. So let's go inside. This is one of the live work spaces at the Tannery Artist Lofts. Now, I sometimes make the mistake of assuming that everybody knows what live work space is. When we're talking about live work space, we're talking about, as ArtSpace does it, it's a rental apartment, and it's affordable housing. It qualifies for Section 42 of the IRS code, and so we are bound by all the regulations that affect Section 42 housing. But we get to pay for it with low-income housing tax credits, which is an important funding mechanism for a lot of affordable housing in the United States. So what we do, given that model, is we add 100 to 150 square feet so that the artist has room to have a studio in his or her unit. And here's an artist working on the floor. That's not at all uncommon. I was once in a unit in Houston where the artist had converted his bedroom into a workshop, and there was nothing in the bedroom except a table saw, and that's where he made his frames. And in the Toshiro Kaplan in Seattle, there was a silk artist who did just beautiful work, who had put her studio into the bedroom. And because it was the dyes she used were a little aromatic, and so she built a platform in the living area, and she just went in, and that was where she slept. So artists are very creative in how they use the space, and that's fine with us. Here's a guy painting on the floor, and there's the living area right behind him. This is one of the bigger units from the Toshiro Kaplan in Seattle. It's just a magnificent space, and I don't know what else I can say about it. It's just gorgeous. I want to live there. It's huge, for one thing, and it's a corner. We're looking south. It's in the Pioneer Square neighborhood, so it's full of interesting historical and cultural things. But it was the first affordable housing in that entire neighborhood when it went up. This is from our project in Pittsburgh, the Spinning Plate, 37 units, and it was an old automobile dealership. I love the windows; those they're hard to wash, I assume. But as you can see, nice ceilings. And this was an old-fashioned automobile factory where when the automobiles were built, they were built on the upper floors. And they moved them down, and when they got to the showroom, they were ready to be sold. But it was not a case where it was office building above. The whole thing was for use by the automobile dealer himself. That's a nice space. We also do other kinds of spaces in our projects. This is from a new construction project in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's 37 units and a 3-level gallery. It's probably the fanciest gallery we've done. And the galleries have to be financed a little differently than the housing because HUD is not interested in paying for galleries as part of its affordable housing projects, but we figure out ways to do it. And this is a nice gallery that it can double as a meeting room and so on. We have galleries that have performances and rehearsals of various kinds. So I like that space a lot. This is one that Anna and I know really well because it's right in downtown Minneapolis, our home. In 1999, Art Space acquired an old Schubert theater, and the city of Minneapolis basically gave us the theater and gave us $4.5 million to move it off the block that it was sitting on, and we did it. And it was the heaviest building ever moved on rubber tires. We moved it 2 blocks away. And what is the website? If you Google heaviest building ever moved, something like that. Google it, or you can find it on YouTube. There's a video of it that's available. It's kind of cool. You can see it moved the 2 blocks, crossed 1 street, and now this is what resulted. This is a 500-seat theater. Its main focus is dance. It's the first theater in Minneapolis that was built specifically for dance, and it's got lovely sight lines and it's technically very well equipped. And it took us 11, 12, 13 years to do. It was a really, really hard project, and everybody sort of said, this isn't going to happen. Why don't you just knock it down? But we didn't, and there it is. Other kinds, this is a classroom / rehearsal room in Washington, D.C., the Brooklyn Artist Lofts, and basically we did a residential building next to can't remember the name of the dance group, but that it is Dance Place. Okay, and this studio was designed for them to use, and it's also done for teaching and so forth. And it's a lovely studio, but actually the reason I there is I just think it's a lovely picture. So and various kinds of space for gathering. And here we are back at the Toshiro Kaplan in Seattle, where there's an art exhibition opening once a month, the first Friday or first Thursday, whenever it is. People come to this building in Seattle, and all the galleries are open with new exhibitions, and it's a big social event as well as a big arts event. And as I said, this was a section of Seattle where nothing was happening. So these projects have had a lot of impact on their neighborhoods. So that's just kind of an overview of the kinds of projects we do, and we, if I sat here and showed you every one, you'd get bored. But it's a pretty good indication. We tend to work in larger cities, but we also work in smaller cities. Our smallest project is 10 units in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, population 13,000, and we've done some others in the 20s and 30s, and now we will see what we have to say about the arts market in York, PA. The survey itself it's just an online survey that we created years ago because we sort of felt we needed to know how big the market was in any community where we were going to be. This is incidentally from our preliminary feasibility. That's York City Hall. And I forget the artist's name. I bet some of you know him. Soji. Thank you. So over the years, we've conducted more than 40 of these surveys, and we've reached 25,000 plus artists. And in addition, there are really 2 surveys. There's a survey of individual artists and a survey of arts organizations, which we did not do in York. But when we do them, altogether we've surveyed 1,000 or more arts organizations, creative businesses, when we're specifically looking for non-residential tenants for a project. The goal of the survey, the number 1 goal is to quantify the demand. We need to know how many projects, how many live work units to build. We need to know what other kinds of rental spaces particularly studio spaces to include in the project, and commercial space when that's an issue. We try to articulate the concept as well. Often the city has a very good idea of sort of where the project might be or what the needs are. I spoke about Santa Cruz, where the problem was that the artists were leaving the community because they couldn't afford to live there, and they wanted to preserve some of the historic tannery buildings, and they wanted places for artists to live, and so they had a pretty thorough and complete agenda. Sometimes that's often not the case, and so we try to articulate the concept of the project to be through the survey. We look for the kinds of spaces and features that artists prefer. It will be immediately apparent that when you're talking about the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, which is sort of, you think of an artist, it's a member of a brass band. Music came in very, very strong. And so when there are a lot of musicians, one of the features that artists ask for is soundproofing, so that they can practice without disturbing their neighbors and vice versa. And we also try to get a sense of who are the artists and get a description of them. We want to know what their disciplines are for obvious reasons. We want to know their current living and working arrangements, because that will inform the nature of the project as well, and their ability to pay. Sometimes, even though there are a lot of artists who qualify, for one reason or another, an art space project is not something that they feel they can afford, and we try to find that out going in. So the survey tells us a whole bunch of things. How many live-work units the market supports is number one. That's the thing that absolutely we have to know from the survey, because that tells us whether to go forward or not. The ideal ratio of efficiencies, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms, is another important factor. And it's particularly true in communities where there are a lot of artists with families and young children. That helps us determine whether we're maybe building more 2 and 3 bedroom units. We have our newest project in Northeast Minneapolis is all 2 and 3 bedrooms. How many work-only spaces the market supports, the kinds of shared spaces they're interested in, and what affordable means to them. So we got to York originally about a year ago. I think on the thing it says 2012. That was a typo. 2013 is correct. In February of 2013, 3 of us did a preliminary feasibility visit. And in April, in our report, we said, yeah, we think there's probably a market here. We recommend doing an arts market survey, and let's find out if we build it, whether they will come. And the city said, yes, that's fine. So it always takes a while to get those surveys into the queue and online and up. But we got it up live in 2014 in January. And here we are in June and announcing the results. I can put the drum roll in here. These are the 3 questions that we were looking specifically that the survey contained. How many people in here took the survey, just out of curiosity? Oh, good, great. The basic questions: would you relocate to an affordable artist live-work community in York if it were built? Number 1 question. Secondly, would you rent studio or creative space on an ongoing basis, not occasionally, but sign up a year's lease for a studio or something like that? And third, would you rent a studio or creative workspace on an occasional basis? And so, can I have that drum roll, please? Excellent, thank you. And this is what we found. First of all, 459 people completed the survey, and that was a really good turnout. It's just, there was a lot of attention focused on the existence of the survey by the city and all of the arts organizations in New York. We felt right from the beginning that we were going to get a good turnout, and that proved to be the case. 167 people said yes, they are interested in relocating to an affordable live-work facility in New York. And that's a really good number, especially for a relatively small city. We were very impressed by that and very pleased by that. And 134 of them are interested in renting studio or creative workspace on an ongoing basis. I'm going to show you a second slide which breaks those numbers down a little bit. The column on the left is live work, and the column on the right is studio. And the difference between the blue and the green is that the people who are represented by the green bars are people who said, I'm interested in this one or that one, but didn't fill out both. The 51 people in the blue section said, I'm interested in both of these things. And so in our calculations, we don't calculate those 51 people in both columns. We calculate them only in the one column. And it could have been the other, but we put them into the live work column. And so what we conclude from that is that a market exists in New York for a project of up to, we say 56 live work units. I know Kevin Schreiber this morning was saying 57, but it's how we do this is we take this 167 in this column here and we divide by 3. And we use a triple redundancy to do our calculations because we like to play it safe. We're a nonprofit and we don't want to build more, and we certainly don't want to recommend more than the market can bear. And so for every 3 artists who say, yes, I'm interested in live workspace in New York, we say, okay, that's 1 unit. And we've used this formula over and over again over the years, and it has proved pretty reliable. What we're looking for is a project that leases up quickly and has a waiting list. It's obviously in everyone's interests, ours as developer and owner, the city's, and certainly that of the artist community that lives in the building, if it's full. And so 3 to 1 brings us to 56 live work units and 27 individual studio units, because we divide this number by 3, but not this, because we've counted those folks once, so we won't count them a second time. So 27 individual work studios, they would get funded differently. They're not affordable housing, they're workspace. So we would look for different funding mechanisms for those. And in fact, that's usually a smaller number gets built than the market can support. And now a variety of other things can affect the actual unit count in a project. I think I talked earlier, or maybe last night, about in Chicago, which is, got zillions of artists. We did a project that I think has it's either 24 or 28 units, and no commercial space of any kind. That's the building that they said, this is the building we want you to redevelop. And it's near Garfield Park and in an area which really needed the help, but it's a small project. And we could easily have done one 3 times that size. So sometimes there are factors that determine the size of the project which have nothing to do with, or little to do with, the market. General affordability of housing in an area. If you can rent a 3-bedroom house in New York for the same price as a 1,200 square foot apartment in our complex, that's something we have to take into consideration. That's competition of a real kind. The number of income qualifying households. If everybody who says, yes, I'm interested in moving, but they don't qualify for affordable housing, that's something we have to look at. The availability of financial resources. These projects typically run, 10, 12, 14, 16 $million, depending on the size and their location, and some of them a good deal more than that. And so we have to be sure that we can build them, that we can afford to pay for them. The availability of suitable buildings or sites and competition from other developments are also issues. So a variety of things can affect how large the project is in the final analysis. So here are some specifics from the York survey. The interested artists, and those are the people, the 167 who said they were interested, a wide range of disciplines, but you'll see that the first three are all kind of related. And that's pretty typical for an art space survey. 32%, about 1 in 3, are in painting and drawing. Another quarter, 25%, are in photography, and 1 in 5, graphic arts and design. So that's a big chunk. And if say a 40 or a 50 unit project is built here, you can bet that it's going to fill up mostly with people who are in some form of visual arts. And it's, you get down to 17% for music. Writing and literary arts is down at 12%. And then theater, which is my area, is 9%, and dance, which is Anna's, is like 9%. So there are a variety of things, but we don't determine that, and we're open. We don't have a sense that one kind of an artist is better than another kind of an artist, and we're open to all people who are in creative pursuits, who are serious about it. We welcome them. The artists who did the survey were asked to cite the features of the workspaces that they were most interested in, and I think each one was allowed to do 4. And internet access, not surprisingly, was right up at the top. Natural light is a big one for visual artists particularly. Painters really like extra storage space. And everybody likes high ceilings. Why would you not? Soundproofing is right up there too at 28%. And these are things that as a rule we try as much as possible to get into our projects. Generally, we like natural light, large windows, storage spaces. Sometimes a little dicey to pay for, but high ceilings. When we do your old daylight factories all had high ceilings and large windows because they didn't have much in the way of lighting other than sunlight. But when we do new construction, we try to do that as much as possible as well. An interesting one here, 14% were interested in storefront or direct access to the street for retail sales. And we don't do that too much. We have a project in Portland, Oregon, where some of the units are on the street front, and if you're an artist who gets one of those units, you have to agree to open your unit for storefront sales a certain number of days per month or hours per week or whatever it is, and so that's an interesting feature, and people have asked us, what did you find in the survey that surprised you? I mean, it's not a huge number, but it's significant. People were also asked to talk about the spaces, the amenities, and so forth that they were interested in. I think there were you could do up to 3, and more than half said artist in residence space was of interest to them, and that was surprising. We don't see that very often, and that's not. Artist in residence space is not something that you can pay for with tax credits, which is our primary funding tool. So if that stands as we move forward, we'll have to figure out a way to pay for it. But that's one of the things we do. 31% gallery and exhibition space, 22% general purpose studio space. A paint room is a great idea, especially a messy paint room. Printmaking facilities, and you can see that it's pretty much consistent with what serious artists are looking for in their studio facilities, and these could be shared, but they're important. We got a few slides on demographics, and then I'd like to share with you. In terms of age, you can see obviously the big one is that almost 50% of the artists are between 21 and 30. This is not uncommon. These are the people who are making the least amount of money, and for whom the rent they're paying now is it's a challenge for them. They haven't established their reputations, and so they're not selling much work, and it's hard to make a go of it. So these are the people who are very definitely interested in the possibility of having their studios in their apartments. What a great deal. And you add the ones between 31 and 40, and now you're talking of essentially about 2/3 of the interested artists are in that age range. 58% of those who filled out the survey are female. That doesn't necessarily mean that 58% of the artists in New York are female. Probably means that more females than males in any household will actually do the survey, although we encouraged everybody to do it. But it's almost a 6-to-4 ratio.
What was the other?
Others are people who identify as transgender, in all of its various forms. So, the ethnicity, about 79% of those who took the survey are white, 8% are black, and that tells us that probably the ratio of artists in the black community who filled out the survey is smaller than the ratio of artists in the white community. So in doing outreach to artists in the pre-development process, we would be advocating pretty strongly outreach to the African American community in New York. We strongly believe that our projects are better if they have a diverse population, and at least as diverse as the communities in which they exist. Education. 37% had some college, 30% a bachelor's degree. So yeah, that's, I think, fairly typical for the kinds of results we get on these surveys. Now this is a little more complicated one, but remembering that our primary financing tool for these projects are federal low-income housing tax credits, which filter through the states, and developers apply for them. They're competitive, they're hard to get, and but they're really lucrative, so they're worth doing. And I don't know how well you can see the shaded area, which runs down to here, down to there. The shaded area represents artists who qualify by virtue of their income for low-income housing tax credits. The more people in the household, the more money you can make and still qualify. And that's why it's not just a plain old square. And something like, it was 84 respondents, so about half of them who are interested artists have incomes that are at or below 60% of the area median income for York. Now, the area median income is just a number that HUD publishes every year, and that says, if your income is this, half of the people in York County make more money than you do, and half of them make less. There's the median, and 60% of that is the cutoff line for low-income housing tax credit projects. So almost about 1 in 2 of all the people who responded to the survey and said they were interested would qualify by virtue of their income. And that is a very big deal, and it's a very good, it's a positive indicator from our point of view. If everybody who was interested was making too much money to live in the project, it wouldn't be very helpful. Here there's a strong component of people who would qualify to live there by virtue of their annual income. And the median income for a household of 4 is $68,700. A few more statistics, and then we're done with statistics. As I said, 59% are 30 or younger. 25% of the people live alone. That suggests that this might be a project that has a fair number of one-bedroom apartments in it, as opposed to a lot of 2s and 3s. And also because almost 4 and 5 do not have children in the home now. And so, again, that suggests smaller units might be practical. 1 and 3 have annual household incomes of $20,000 or less. That might mean that we could drop the area median, we could drop the qualifying income, which would enable us to get more tax credits, which makes the project more affordable for us and therefore for York. So I hope I'm giving a sense that the survey tells us where, sort of where you can push the balloon and still have the project make sense financially, which is, of course, the big thing. And the one here that I just think is really terrific, 37% of the artists who said they were interested have never lived in York. And that indicates that the word got out and that there's a good deal of interest, not just in the community, but outside of the community. And people are candidates to come here and live in the project and become York residents. So, what happens now? The results of the survey are in. The first thing is that the city has to decide, does it want to proceed? And if the answer is yes, then the city and art space do a little dance, and we say, okay, we will sign a pre-development contract. And the pre-development contract is typically stretches out over 12 to 18 months, sometimes even longer. And the city will pay ultimately $750,000, more or less, for a scope of work that will be in 3 phases and will involve site selection. It'll involve the hiring of an architect, the preparation of all the working drawings, and an application for low-income housing tax credits, which is done every September in Pennsylvania. And all of that will be done, but in step 1, it's basically the beginning. We establish the project scope. We look at building sites, buildings and sites, really, because as I said earlier, we used to do pretty much all historic rehabilitation. Now we do a good deal of new construction. So we'll look at buildings and sites. We need to obtain site control. You can't proceed if you don't have the authority to acquire the property. So that's one of the things we look for early on in the process. We begin our outreach to artists and arts organizations. We want a lot of people to know about the project, obviously, so that when the project opens, there are people who want to live there. And we connect with potential partners and commercial tenants who might be interested in being in the building over the long haul. Prerequisites for moving forward or to the next phase of pre-development. We got to get site control. If we don't control a site, we don't have anything. And we look for strong involvement of local leadership. And I have to say that in York, it's about as strong as we've ever found it. So we're really happy about that. 3 to 6 months of time, $150,000, and typically the city will pay for that with an allocation of community development block grants. There are other federal programs that the city gets an annual allocation of funds, and it will make the determination that this is a project that it wants to support, and apply those funds. And sometimes the city will sell us a building for $1 or a site for $1, and then the value of that is part of the city's contribution. So if we get $1 million building for $1, that's a big contribution from the city. That counts as well. So community development block grants, as I said, city funding of various kinds. Sometimes private foundations put up the money. In Council Bluffs, Iowa, a private foundation put up all the money. Corporations, depends, it's different in every community. But the key thing in every community is that from ArtSpace's perspective, this is something we don't raise that money. We used to, and it was too hard, and we couldn't do it. So this is where the city has to step forward, make a commitment of funds. We don't ask that the taxpayers, chip in $100 each. It doesn't come out of the general fund, but the city has to make it a sufficient priority. And if the city figures out a way to do that and is ready to move forward, we're in great shape. And then down the road, pre-development 2, the second phase is where we hire the architect. We create really now reliable budgets for what it'll cost to build and operate the building, and we submit a tax credit application to the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. If we get the tax credits, then we're into pre-development 3, and now we're closing in on getting all of the funding and financing in place. We go to the foundations, and we do help on this part. We can go to foundations that would support this kind of a project in Pennsylvania. We get all the construction documents in order, and then we have a big closing ceremony, and it's a big deal here, and it's a big deal in the ArtSpace office, because we do like 2 or 3 of these a year typically. And so when we close on a project, that means we can start construction, and the big deal is it's paid for at that point. This is we take out a little mortgage, but it's small enough so that the rents paid by the tenants will cover it. And so when we break ground for a project, it's paid for, and from then on it's self-sustaining, and that's one of the things that we really like about the project, and that communities really like about the projects too, because we've never had to go back to a community and once the project is up and running and saying, oh, please, can we have more money, we miscalculated. Never had to do that. Construction and lease up and operation, and if things have been successful, the place leases up quickly and operates, and soon has a waiting list, and it becomes a real community asset, and other developers say, that's kind of a nice place in town to build my apartment building. And somebody says, I think a bar across the street from that thing would be great, and a restaurant, and so forth. That is the end of our presentation. We think that if you build it here in New York, they will come, and we hope that'll be the case.